Hi, and welcome back to Maple History, the Canadian History Podcast. And today I have as a guest my husband again, Simon.
Hi, everyone.
And today we're going to do a big overview of the Indigenous nations and peoples in what is now Canada. My biggest problem with this episode was what do I leave out, but also what do I put in so you can get an idea of who was here from forever ago. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a counterclockwise tour where I start in the Arctic. I'm going to go around to northern BC, to coastal BC, and so on. And I'm going to frog jump over some of Ontario and parts of Quebec and head over to the East Coast. And the reason for the frog jumping is I'm going to be doing a fairly in-depth look at the nations there before getting into the Europeans coming over. So I'm going to be looking at the Wendat and Haudenosaunee separately. Now, and I'd also like to start off just talking a little bit about the challenges and figuring out what names to use for Indigenous nations.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And it's difficult because the different nations use the name that they've always called themselves, but they also use the names that they were given because of expediency. They're used to it. It's just they want to. It's just because they're speaking multiple languages, right? Or different languages. What I've learned is that there are exonyms, and these are the names that were given to people by someone else. So these are sometimes the names that enemies of a nation were given, and then they were adopted by Europeans, and that's why we know them. So a perfect example of that would be the Iroquois. So we all know that name. That is one of the most famous names of Indigenous nations in the world, or at least in the Western world. But that name was given to the Iroquois by the Wendat and Ojibwe.
Oh, really?
And Snake.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. But the Iroquois are the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy is made up of 5 nations, and then later 6 nations.
Okay.
So now, contemporary, they're the 6 nations.
Yes. Okay. Well, when we do it, we always do the corporate, land recognition thing. They always talk, at least where I am, they always talk about the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I did not know that that Iroquois meant snake. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So some modern books will use the autonym. So the autonym is the Haudenosaunee.
Okay.
That's what they call themselves. But some don't, and there's different reasons for that. And I don't know what all of them are, but you'll see in a lot of American history books, they don't use the autonyms very often at all.
Oh, okay.
Well, they don't use modern history books. It's like Iroquois. Like you're like, oh, okay. But in modern Canadian history books, some don't, but they tend to use the autonym.
Interesting. Okay.
Just like the Americans, they keep saying Indian.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So we'll leave them there. So you'll find that usually history books written by Indigenous scholars, they will use the autonym.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty standard. But it gets really confusing when researching because I will do my best to respect the names, the nations, what they call themselves, but I'm going to mess it up.
Fair.
Because it's just going to happen.
Yeah. I remember you showed me once, while you were researching, you showed me this table of how to identify everything. And I was like, oh my goodness, there's just so much. Although, I mean, was it any more complicated than trying to identify every country and sub-region of Europe? No. But I mean, it's just so much, right? It's a massive, massive area of land.
Right. Well, just a couple other examples of names. So in a lot of, a lot of older books, the people that lived near James Bay in northern Manitoba were called the Swampy Cree. But the name they call themselves is Omushke Gowak, and they speak an Algonquian language. And in northern British Columbia, there are the Wet'suwet'en people. So you might have even heard that because they're in the news because they're land defenders.
Yes, I've heard of them.
They were called the Carrier people.
Carrier, okay. Why?
Yeah, because they carried the ashes of their, so some of the women would carry the ashes of their deceased spouse.
Oh, okay. Like an urn type thing?
Yeah, in some sort of vessel.
Yeah, okay.
Let's start the tour. So we will start with the Great White North. So the Arctic was the last region in North America to be settled for pretty obvious reasons, because it was covered in ice for the longest.
Yeah.
So they couldn't get over. And the first people there were called Tunit, about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. So they hunted with bows and arrows and harpoons. And what's quite interesting is that when they left or disappeared, who really knows, they were replaced with the Dorset people who lived in the Arctic from about 2,800 to 1,000 years ago, 2,800 to 1,000 years ago. And they didn't hunt with bows and arrows.
Wait, how did we know their name if they got replaced?
We call them that.
Oh, okay.
We call them that.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Sorry, I interrupted. The bows and arrows.
No, it's fine. That's about 3,000 to 1,000 years ago. And so what I said, I mentioned they didn't hunt with bows and arrows, so they lost that technology somehow. But the Dorset people didn't have bows and arrows, but they did have kayaks and umiaks that they used to hunt whales on open water. So they still had the harpoon and they had other tools.
Okay.
But yeah, they're hunting whales. So that's different. So the Tunit people weren't hunting whales.
Yeah. Could you imagine hunting a whale in a kayak?
Yeah.
like,
I can't imagine being in a kayak in the Arctic Ocean now.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's true.
And so the traditional Inuit culture, which these are known as Thule people, and they're originally from Alaska. And bows and arrow were back in the game by now. And these would also be some of the people that Vikings, or more accurately the Norse, met, who tried settling on Lanso meadows in Newfoundland. So something that the Thule people they brought from Alaska, they brought pottery to this area, but it didn't stick around very long because it was very poorly fired, thick and crumbly.
Mm.
It's very difficult to get a hot fire going with hardly any wood.
Yeah.
Or none.
Yeah.
And archaeologists have a very snarky name for this pottery. They call it Thule crudware.
Crudware.
I love that. I love those little, no offense to the Thule people, but they make shit pottery, I guess. So
get a kiln, won't you? That's funny.
But so hunting in general remained consistent for centuries. The techniques and tools, they may have changed over time, but they hunted whales, seals, muskox, and even polar bears, which is as brave as you can possibly be. Because of the region they lived in, they lived on mostly animals with little to no fresh plants.
Mm-hmm.
Food was eaten mostly raw, but occasionally cooked in soapstone pots over fires of moss or blubber lamps. So that would have been the fuel they had because they don't have wood. So they would use oils.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So there was a strict food taboo that you should never mix land and sea products. So you would never cook seal or caribou together.
Interesting.
Yeah, as part of their ethos, like their spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
They would also store food and purposely let it decay. And I'm going to quote you from the book, The First Peoples in Canada, here to give you an example of this technique. Buckle up.
Okay.
Quote, to prepare one particular savory meal, a whole seal skin, complete with the blubber layer, was stuffed with small seabirds and left under rocks until the contents had turned the consistency of cheese, end quote.
Well, isn't there similar techniques to fish in the Nordic countries?
Yeah,
isn't there they put them
they let the tinned fish rot in the can and then it's bulging.
Oh yeah. No, but didn't they have I thought even before that they buried fish or something like that?
Probably. I mean, a lot of those northern the Indigenous people in the Arctic, they have a lot of similarities. Like people in Greenland, the people of Alaska, you're kind of on the same techniques and traditions.
Yeah, makes sense.
But yeah, that's I'm gonna.
It's not for you.
No,
you're gonna pass.
No,
pass. Yeah.
I know.
I would give it a go. I totally would. I would 100% have a bite. I'm kind of nose blind though, so
I don't know if you could be nose blind to that.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's too far, man.
I'm pretty ambitious with my food though. I'm like, I'll give it a go.
I don't know, but could you eat rotten bird the consistency of fish or cheese?
Cheese? Well, if I knew, so I would if I saw other people having it and not getting all sick and stuff like that. Yeah, I'd give it a go.
Okay.
It's stinky bean from Japan.
That's very different, though.
It is very different. It's just
It's
fermented, like
yeah,
soybean.
that's
That's very different. You're right.
yeah. I don't know if it's still done now because they do have a lot of traditional foods like eating raw food,
Mhm.
eating raw blubber and meat. Like it's very common. Like that's
Yeah.
traditional food. That's kind of like comfort food for
Yeah.
Inuit people. Okay, so women married young and spent a great deal of their time making and repairing clothes. So these would all be hides and furs and stuff, of course.
Yeah.
And the shoes in particular would be needing repair often. They would get wet and stiff, and then they would chew them to soften them up.
Oh, okay.
So the harsh conditions when hunting was poor led to a very dark side of the Inuit culture, darker even than the seal cheese situation. So infanticide and the abandonment of elderly was sometimes necessary to keep the population low and mobile for survival. This is reflected, I know, but
Yeah, I get it, but it's like tough. It's a hard life, right?
yeah. So this is reflected in one of the Inuits' foundational myths. I'm going to read you the story of Sedna as told in the Inside Labrador magazine. So once upon a time when the world was new, humans and dogs were created to populate the land. Together they spread across the north. One woman, the daughter of a hunter, spurned the advances of men who came courting her. Instead, she married a dog. Her father was ashamed of her and put her in his umiak, an open skin boat. When they got far out to sea, he threw her overboard, planning to be rid of her once and for all. The daughter seized hold of the boat, hoping to save herself. Angered at this, the father cut off her fingers with his knife. The woman, known as Sedna, sank to the bottom of the ocean, but she did not die. And instead, the spirit of the sea, providing life to all sea animals. Her thumb became the walrus, her first finger the seal, and her middle finger the polar bear. She lives there to this day in a sod house at the ocean's bottom.
That's a harsh myth.
I
Wow.
know.
Okay.
But that's where the animals come from.
Yeah.
And there are other versions of the story where she marries a man who was cruel to her, and her father came to rescue her. They hit bad weather, and the father decided to dump her overboard to save himself. Personally, I like the version where she married the dog. So that's a very brief overview of the Inuit and their predecessors in the Arctic. And I know I missed a lot, and I will get back to them at some point to give more of their story. I'm going to be a broken record about that because this is the whole thing. It's
This is the whirlwind.
like a little surface dusting of what's going on. So now to the Western subarctic. So this is getting into the Northwest Territories, the Yukon, Northern Alberta, and the inland part of Northern British Columbia.
Did you say Yukon?
Sorry,
Like-
the Yukon. Yukon. Okay, very broadly, this is the area that's home to the Dene people, historically known as Athapascan, and the Chippewayan, the Wet'suwet'en, Tlingit, and Cree peoples. There are a lot of tribes and nations within this area with different lifeways, so I'm only giving just a nibble of information here. So very broadly, people hunted large animals like caribou and other smaller animals like deer, and they fished and they trapped. And as you got farther west, the nations that lived near the large rivers with huge salmon runs incorporated that into their diet, which gave them a much more stable food source. So I'm going to scoot right past that. So now we're into the Northwest coast, and you can probably picture in your mind a little of who these nations are. These are the people that you can use the shorthand by saying they are the people of salmon and cedar. This is not to oversimplify their culture at all, but to reflect on the power of those resources and how they made the coastal nations populous and thriving for millennia. So they lived in villages, like in the winter, typically, in cedar homes. So they weren't living in teepees or wigwams. They were building cedar homes, and they used huge carved canoes to hunt and fish in the ocean. And they're known for their beautiful artwork. So if you think of the West Coast, you think of the totem poles and the baskets,
Yeah.
and you can picture in your mind the West Coast, the trees and the damp.
Yeah. Well, also, I imagine with all of that access to food and the temperate climate and all that sort of stuff, it allows for more opportunity for things like beautiful art and like craftsmanship and all of that. And yeah, cedar, long lasting, naturally water repellent wood, and it doesn't rot really easily, insect repellent, yeah, all that sort of stuff.
Because they were so much more stable and had their food sources were so much more stable. they were more hierarchical. So this is where you'd think of the chiefs, and there would be slaves, and then there'd be kind of, I don't want to use the word peasant, but kind of like the middling people, and then kind of an upper class.
Oh, okay.
So they made their clothing out of woven cedar bark, which I found very interesting. But that's because the perpetual damp in the region made hide clothing gross.
Oh, yeah, it would.
Yeah, it just would not work.
Because you couldn't, I don't think you could waterproof it easily. Like, we have normal, like now we have chemical waterproofing things and that sort of stuff. Huh.
Well, I'm sure they waterproofed like the other places that do hide because it rained and snowed and whatnot. So it'd have to be, but it's their damp. Like you wouldn't be able to cure the hide the same way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true.
And it would just be always damp.
Yeah, that wouldn't feel nice.
No. Society in these nations were much more structured, as well as being divided into groups, or anthropologists call them moieties. So they
call them what?
Moieties. Moieties.
I did hear you right. I just didn't believe you.
Yeah. So those would be like the clans.
Okay.
So they would be the Raven clan or the Eagle clan in the Haida Nation.
That's right. Did you say the archaeologists came up with that term?
Yeah, that's like not archaeologists, like anthropologists.
Okay.
Like it's an anthropological term.
Oh, okay. It's just like a standard term. Okay.
Yeah, it's not like this isn't specific to the Haida people.
Gotcha.
So a very important part of the nation's functions in this region are potlatches. So these were ceremonial gift giving and wealth redistribution that happened often and for basically any reason. So it'd be held for birth of a child, a wedding, a death, a new chief was being installed, guests, like anything. So, and these would be typically held in winter when everyone would be together in the winter villages, because they'd have to be out where like the river runs, right? Like where the salmon runs and stuff.
Yeah. It's amazing that humanity has been doing that for an extremely long period of time.
Yeah.
And across seemingly all cultures that I'm aware of anyways.
Yeah.
Huh. That's really cool. So
to give you a sense of the nations in this area, and I know I'm going to miss some, keep that in mind. So there's the Haida, the Tsimshian, Nuchalnuth, Nuxalk, Kwakwaka'wakw, and Salish nations. All right, I'm going to move down into the interior now. So there is blending because it's like the rivers are running through it, right? Like, So we're still in British Columbia, and we're moving into the interior Salish people or the Plateau region. Oh, sorry, these are, the Indigenous, I looked them up and I have them written down phonetically from a source I had from the British Columbia government site, and it's still hard.
So you're saying now the names are getting hard? I thought they were hard before.
No.
Okay.
All right. Ingla, Kapmu, NLA PAMUX.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
I'm not going to try.
I'm going to try it again. Ingla, Kapmu. That's better.
All right.
And the Statlium people lived in the Fraser and Thompson rivers areas and relied on salmon as a major part of their diet. It's a much drier region, so clothing made of hide was typical. And lower status people wore salmon skin footwear. I wouldn't like that one either.
Oh.
I'm sure they had a system to tamp down covetousness because I would want different footwear.
Yeah.
That's me.
Salmon skin.
They had a lot of it, to be fair.
Yeah, that's true. They would have a lot of it. I'm just like thinking how fast you would run through that.
I know.
Very delicate.
Yeah. Well, maybe they layered it.
Yeah, maybe. Something.
So anyways, there would be a mix of influences in the Plateau people. So you'd have the salmon runs in some areas. And then they also had potlatch, and the art was sometimes similar. But in areas where salmon was not common, you would see more influence from the Plains nations. So more of hunting than of the fish and things like that. So they would have celebrated their potlatch ceremonies and other spiritual ceremonies in the winter, similar to coastal people. In the summer, they were on the move hunting. Tunaksa people had many similarities to Plains people in their dress and military societies. And this makes a lot of sense because they were enemies of the Blackfoot. So Blackfoot are one of the Plains people. And so they would have fought each other frequently and just been a lot of contact. So moving eastwards again, we are on the plains with the Siksika people, Cree, Dakota, Assiniboine, and Ojibwe people. And I'm sure I didn't get every nation on this list. It's non-exhaustive. So for many of the nations, in particular the Siksika or Blackfoot Nation, their time on the plains is split into the dog days and horse days.
Okay.
Because of movies or just the general idea of plains indigenous people, it had never crossed my mind that there was a time when they didn't have horses. But they didn't get horses until the Spanish came and they did horrible things. So that was kind of like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So they became so integral that we just kind of always assumed they were there, but they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
So before horses, dogs were used as pack animals, and they would hitch the dogs up to something called a travois, which is obviously a French word, so it's a different word in their respective languages, which is an A-frame bound together, and items are placed on it and dragged.
Okay. I remember seeing pictures of those, but I always saw them either a person was dragging them or maybe a horse.
Yeah, some other nations do use people, women actually.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so life more or less revolved around the bison hunt. The hunt had been important for thousands of years, but around 2,000 years ago, there was a change in how they hunted. Instead of small bands of hunters stalking animals, large groups coordinated their efforts and included new rituals with their hunts. So an important part of this change involves an oral narrative called The Lost Boys. This is a very short version, but the story is
A bunch of guys, they like met some vampires and
California, was it?
yeah, that's where it's from, right?
Before Sutherland and
Yeah. Sorry.
Nope, sorry. So a group of boys who wanted clothes made of bison calves, but they were denied this by their people. So they were angry at this injustice, and together they left and went to the sky country. And there they became the Pleiades, also known as M45 to astronomers. And every year the Pleiades disappear from the night sky at springtime, which is the signal for people to leave their winter camps and return to the large groups for the bison hunt. So in the story, the boys leave the night sky to remind people of their lack of generosity.
Okay.
I thought that was such a cool story.
I don't know what the Pleiades are, though. Like, what are those?
It's a constellation.
And it leaves?
Yes.
Like, does it dip down?
Yes.
Or on the horizon?
I don't know I don't know. You answer that one. You got the physics.
Yeah.
Anyways, it leaves the night sky. The Lost Boys bugger off.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know what happens to the stars. That's for another show.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going into the Eastern Woodlands, and there is more of a blending of cultures as you go east with the Plains Cree and the Plains Way. They are evidence of that. When the fur trade began in the 16th and 17th centuries, these people were intermediaries between the Algonquian people in northern Ontario and Quebec, and the other Plains people to the west, because they were right in the middle, and they shared similar aspects of both cultures. The Algonquin people occupied a great swath of territory in northeastern North America, except for the areas around the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence. That's where the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Wendat Confederacy had control.
Okay.
The main indigenous language groups that are in the eastern woodlands and eastern subarctic are the Ojibwe. So people there, they are very broadly, there is Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Cree, and Innu. And there is a lot, Innu, not Inuit. Those are different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Innu, the French call them Montagnais.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever heard that. But anyways, they're the Innu. And there's a lot of fluidity between these regions for hunting and trade. The Cree and a lot of the northern groups, like the Innu, stayed in much smaller family groups in the winter because of hunting practices. And they would meet up for summer for ceremonies and trade and basically spending time together.
Were the Innu like more northern, or is it just like it's just a similar name?
It's just a similar name. They're not connected at all.
Okay.
I don't know why they're called that.
Okay.
I'm sure it's because of in their individual language, it makes more sense.
Yeah.
Like it must sound different. But in English speaking, like I stopped halfway saying Inuit.
Yeah.
The Innu and the Northern Cree people, they were more independent minded, whereas Anishinaabe, those include Ojibwe, Ottawa, and a bunch of other people. They were more communally oriented, and they're more southern.
Okay.
So Anishinaabe people are known for their spirituality. They believe that every living thing in pretty much the whole natural world had a spirit called Manitou. This is common among Indigenous people as well. And they have a lot of stories of supernatural creatures, such as the Wendigo. The Wendigo was a giant monster that craved human flesh and is thought to have been created when a human had a mental breakdown during times of great privation and started wanting to commit acts of cannibalism. So they would kill a person if they started. But it's that story really makes sense because in the winter, if hunting is bad, and like
you're starving,
that snow piles up. This winter we know how high the snow has piled, and we're just down here in southern Ontario, and it's up to our waist.
Yeah.
So another magnificent creature was the thunderbird, who created thunder from its wings and lightning from its eyes. It's awesome. Okay, my favorite is the trickster, or some prefer the term elder brother, and he's Wisekajak. He is a transformer, or so he can change from different to different animals, or a trickster. So common among many people from the plains in Alberta all the way east. So this story that I'm going to tell you does not really give a broad overarching picture of the spirituality of the people of the region. What it does do is show you what simply great stories are in their story kind of library canon, in their oral tradition. You can derive a lesson from the story, but I doubt it was the main reason for its popularity. It comes from an Inishkago, the Swampy Cree scholar, Lewis Bird, via the historian Carolyn Podruchny. Wisekajak was tricking geese by offering to show them his bag of stories. He didn't want to leave them roasting unattended, so he left his bum in charge of keeping watch.
Okay. His bum. All right.
Surprisingly, this was not an effective guard, and some humans stole the geese. When he woke up, he was so upset by this theft that he beats his bum. His bum takes revenge for this beating by farting every time Wisekajak tries to hunt.
Dying. That's a great story.
Could you imagine?
There's a lot of layers to it. Yeah, he's out there trying to shoot a deer. Let's hit a ripper. Deer takes off. But also punching his butt, beating it.
I just can't help but think of the children, on a winter's night, during these which was a storytelling time. They would just tell their elder, "Tell that story, tell that story." Because kids are the same as they've always been.
Yeah. Oh man.
That would be an absolute favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was dying laughing when I read that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Love that.
Maybe we should start telling that whenever we go camping to our kids.
When you go camping with our kids and I stay home?
Yes, that's true.
All right, so we're going to skip over the Woodlands area where the Haudenosaunee and Wendat people live. Like I said, I'm going to be talking about that soon. So now we have the Atlantic provinces of New Brunswick, PEI, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland, where the Beothuk people and Mi'kmaq people are from. Beothuk lived in Newfoundland and spent most of the year on the coast, living off the sea before going into the interior for the fall and winter to hunt. They used birch bark canoes to travel and notably smeared red ochre on themselves. They loved the red ochre.
How do you make red ochre? What is that? What is it? Is it berries or something? Or
I think it's a root.
Yeah. Okay.
And then they would use make a grease paint.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it would stay on really well. Probably bug repellent as well, right? Because you'd have to figure some way out to keep the bugs off you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is actually the origin of the term Red Indian.
Oh, really?
Because they were some of the first people that, the Europeans saw, and they were just covered in ochre.
Oh, huh.
Because, Indigenous people aren't red.
No. It doesn't make any sense. But
no.
If they were painted, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then it just stuck because they're unimaginative.
Yeah.
So there was an annual ochring ritual in the spring where people and objects would be coated in ochre. So they would smear themselves and their canoes, So ochre was clearly very important, and I surmise that the ceremony being held in the spring would be in support of successful hunting and fishing. Now, it's really hard to determine how many Beothuk lived in Newfoundland before European contact. Some estimates were very high, thousands and thousands, but there's no evidence to support the figure. The most realistic estimates by archaeologists are between 500 to 1,000 Beothuk.
Oh, that's not that many.
That's not a lot.
Wow. That's like, it's smaller than the little tiny town I grew up in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
As for how society was structured, they would have had hunting groups that come together in larger bands in summer with a male chief. So the hunting bands would be similar to the other places, be like a couple families would stay together, because it's not very useful to have a huge group hunting in this type of environment, because they're not hunting herds.
Yeah.
Like on the plains.
Yeah, make too much noise.
Yeah, you're in the woods.
Yeah.
So a common thread for leadership in Indigenous nations is less focused on hereditary and more focused on charisma and strong communication skills. And usually hunting expertise was valued. So the Beothuk housing was a little different from other people in the region, particularly like the Mi'kmaq. The historian Ingeborg Marshall used the term mamatik when describing the different types of housing the Beothuk used. It was a type of wigwam, but it was more framed, like instead of conical.
What's the difference between a wigwam and a teepee?
They used birch bark instead of hides.
In wigwams?
Yeah.
Oh, and teepees were hides. Okay.
I could be wrong, but from the regions, because the plains people had the bison and they had tons of hides.
Yeah.
They had the herds and more people. And this is much smaller population. They didn't have the herds. They'd be hunting like individual animals.
Like a deer or a caribou or...
Yeah. So it was a type of wigwam, and in wintertime it could be built up more. So like some of them were square and some of them were like a hexagon.
Oh, okay.
But they were really small. And later observers, so when Europeans came and saw them in there, they noted that the Beothuk slept sitting or tucked into a ball.
Really?
Yeah. Just little wee things.
Huh.
If you don't know much about the Beothuk, the one thing you may know about them is that they're considered extinct.
Yeah.
So as the population dwindled and life became extremely challenging, some Beothuk may have found refuge with the Mi'kmaq. But way down the road, I will get into much more detail about the Beothuk and what happened that led to this fate. So now on to the Mi'kmaq. Their historical land covers a huge amount of territory. It is all of PEI, Nova Scotia, part of New Brunswick, part of Newfoundland, and some of the Lake St. Lawrence, and also extended into areas of the United States.
That's big.
Yeah, that's huge.
It's really big, yeah.
So a quickfire run through is they relied heavily on the sea for their diet. It was upwards of 90%. In the winter, they went inland in small hunting groups of a couple families, but returned to the coast for the summer, where they lived in much larger groups. Typically, they lived in birch wigwams, which would also be terrifying to travel in a birch bark canoe on the ocean.
Yeah.
And they also had lakes and rivers and stuff, right? Because it is New Brunswick. It's not like the Arctic.
I've gone canoeing in like pretty open water on the Great Lakes, and it can be a little terrifying.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to go all the way in to the shoreline to cut across some things. You're out there in pretty open water, and it is like just the wind. I can't even imagine the ocean.
No. Brave. In the last episode, I might have said that in the origin story of the Mi'kmaq, that the land was created by the giver of life by a lightning bolt, but I messed that up. I got confused. The giver of life sent a lightning bolt that created Glooscap, who is the intermediary between humans and the rest of the natural world. The Glooscap is a very important part of the stories that Mi'kmaq people tell about their whole world and how they interact with it. And I'm going to return back to these stories and the Mi'kmaq people in later episodes. All right, so that's the Whirlwind tour of some Indigenous nations in Canada. I know some groups got a little bit more detail than others, but I'll get to all of it, or I'll try to. I can't get to everything because that's not possible. So one point that I really want to leave in your mind is about the blurring of the idea about the blurring of the edges between the different nations. And it's a quote from Carolyn Podruchny, the historian. So to quote, historians categories of Indigenous groups are certainly shaped by the primary sources and documents they use to construct their histories. But before that time, people's lives were primarily shaped by family, relationships, sense of community, common languages, and alliances. End quote. So that's kind of what I want people to have an idea of, that it's like, sure, we have the names and the names that they use for themselves, but they aren't hard lines. They're not hard borders.
Yeah.
They aren't hard cut ethnicities. There's blending always between them. You can be welcomed into the community and become part of that people, then you are part of that people.
It's kind of like being Canadian or from a city. Like, different cities have different cultures of people that grew up in them. You know, people, and of course, people move around. Mm-hmm. There's intermarriage. There's travel and trade. Yeah, of course.
So that's kind of what I wanted to keep in mind. And I know I barely touched the West Coast. Sorry, I really left a lot out, but I just need a lot more time to read about them before I can really speak on it with a little bit more detail. Because some of the stuff I was getting it was from a textbook.
Yeah.
Some wasn't, but some was. So, yeah. So that's it for today. Thank you very much, Simon. And we probably have some laundry to fold.
Yeah. Well, that was fun. I'm happy we did this. Yeah. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.